I've been told more than once that my company was my firstborn child. I never liked that comparison, but I suppose there's truth in it. I raised it from nothing, just an idea scribbled on a napkin in a coffee shop 30 years ago, into one of the most respected software firms in the country. I poured my sweat, my health, and my best years into it. And like any true child, it gave me joy and heartbreak in equal measure. My name is Eleanor Rhodes. I'm 55 years old, and for 3 decades, my life has been a battlefield of deadlines, board meetings, and contracts signed at the 11th hour. I was a programmer once, hunched over clunky machines with a hunger to prove I belonged in a world dominated by men. They laughed at me then. They don't laugh anymore. Now when I walk into a room, people straighten their backs. They lower their voices. They know I'd built something that can't be ignored. My company is my legacy, my crown jewel. But there's another kind of legacy, one far more fragile than balance sheets or quarterly reports. My son, Michael. Michael had just graduated from university that summer. I was so proud, sitting in the sun-baked bleachers watching him stride across the stage in his cap and gown. He was tall, handsome, confident, the kind of young man people turned to look at when he entered a room. He carried himself like someone who had never been told no in his life, and in truth he rarely had. I'd spoiled him, I'll admit it. Perhaps it was guilt. His father died young, leaving me to raise him alone. I was always so busy late nights at the office, endless business trips, that when I was home I showered him with gifts, privileges, and indulgences. I told myself I was making up for the absence, for all the times I couldn't be there. But love without boundaries can grow into something dangerous. After the ceremony, we hosted a dinner at one of those gleaming downtown restaurants with marble floors and chandeliers that drip with crystals. My colleagues came, the board members came, even a few clients. Everyone congratulated Michael as though his graduation were a coronation, and he soaked it up, smiling, shaking hands, basking in the attention. I remember Harriet, my old CFO, and dear friend leaning across the table, her eyes narrowing as she watched him. "That boy of yours is going to be trouble," she said under her breath. I laughed it off. He's young. He'll settle down once he starts working. But even then, a small part of me wondered, when I looked at Michael that night, raising a glass of champagne as though he were already a king. I felt pride, yes, but also unease. He had inherited my fire, but not my discipline. He wanted success, but not the grind that forged it. Still, he was my son. My only son, and I wanted him by my side, not out in the cold. So I brought him into the company. Not as a leader, not yet, but as an apprentice of sorts. I told him he'd shadow different departments, learn how the gears turned from the inside. Payroll, product design, customer support, things most executives considered beneath them. I wanted him to understand that greatness isn't born from titles, but from knowing every brick that holds the wall. He accepted, at least on the surface. But I could see the flicker of dissatisfaction in his eyes, the impatience simmering beneath his smile. I ignored it. Or perhaps I simply hoped time would sand down his edges. Back then, I still believed I could shape him. That, with the right guidance, the right opportunities, Michael would grow into the leader I always dreamed he could be. I had no idea the storm that was coming. For now, I let myself bask in the fragile peace of that summer. The glow of graduation, the warmth of family dinners, the thrill of imagining that one day I could pass my life's work into his hands. My company was strong. My son was stepping into the world. I thought the hardest battles were behind me. But I was wrong. The hardest battles were still ahead, fought, not against strangers in boardrooms, but against the very blood of my blood. It was 3 months after Michael's graduation when the storm first began to gather. He had been rotating through departments just as I'd instructed, spending a few weeks in payroll, then in marketing, then in customer support. I had hoped he would learn humility, see the company from the ground up, and gain a respect for the people who kept the wheels turning. Instead, each department head came to me with the same quiet complaint. Michael was distracted, arrogant, uninterested in the details. He spent more time scrolling his phone than asking questions, more energy talking about his future vision than actually learning the work. I pulled him aside once, gently, in my office. "Michael, these rotations are important. They're not just busy work. They're how you learn what makes the company strong." he shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Mom, I don't need to know how to process payroll. That's not my future. I should be learning strategy, leadership, big picture stuff. You can't understand the big picture without understanding the pieces that make it up, I told him. If you can't respect the foundation, you'll never be able to build higher. He rolled his eyes. You sound like one of those motivational posters. I bit my tongue. He was young. He'd grow out of it. At least that's what I told myself. The confrontation came not long after, one brisk October evening. I had just finished a late call with investors when Michael walked into my office. He didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. He strode in as though he already owned the place, shoulders squared, his chin lifted with the careless arrogance of youth. Mom, he said, we need to talk. Something in his tone set me on edge. I gestured to the chair across from me. What is it? He didn't sit. He planted his hands on my desk and leaned forward. I'm done with these rotations. I've wasted 3 months pretending to care about spreadsheets and phone calls. I know what I want. And what's that? I asked, though I already suspected, the CEO position. The words landed like a stone in my chest. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign that he was joking, but there was no trace of humor in his expression. Only certainty. Michael, I began carefully. You're not ready for that, he scoffed. I've got the degree, I've got the name. People already treat me like I'm the future of this company. Why waste time? You've been running this place for 30 years. Don't you think it's time to let go? A chill crept up my spine. Let go, he nodded. Hand it over. Make me CEO. You can stay on the board, of course. Keep a title if you want, but the company needs fresh blood, new energy, my energy. I set my pen down and folded my hands. Do you have any idea what you're asking? CEO isn't a costume you put on. It's a weight you carry every day. The responsibility is crushing. The mistake's yours and everyone else's fall on your shoulders. You haven't even proven you can lead a single team, let alone a company of thousands. His lips curled into a smirk. That's your way, Mom. Old school. You think everything has to be earned. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. People don't care how long you've paid your dues. They care about who you are, how you present yourself, and I can present myself just fine. I leaned forward, my voice firm. Presentation doesn't win contracts when competitors are circling like sharks. Presentation doesn't get products shipped on time. Presentation doesn't keep investors calm when markets collapse. Substance does. Grit does. Discipline does. His smirk faltered, replaced by a glare. So you don't trust me? I drew a breath. I love you, Michael. I want nothing more than to see you succeed. But love and leadership aren't the same thing. You want the CEO title? Earn it. Prove yourself first. Start as a product manager. Run a team. Show me results. Then we'll talk. His face flushed red. He slammed his palm against the desk, making the pens rattle. Product manager? That's insulting. That's for nobodies. You'd humiliate me in front of the whole company. It's not humiliation, I said softly. It's training. Every leader worth following has walked the ground before they climbed the tower. He straightened, his jaw tight, his eyes flashing with something dark. You'll regret this. One day you'll see I was right. And with that, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass shook in its frame. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city skyline. I felt an ache deep in my chest, not from fear, not yet, but from sorrow. I had dreamed of guiding him gently into this world, of passing him the crown jewel when his shoulders were strong enough to bear it. But he wasn't ready, not by a long shot. And I couldn't see then how his pride, his impatience, his hunger for glory would curdle into something darker. How the boy I raised would begin to sharpen a knife with my name on it. In the months that followed, life at the company found a strange sort of rhythm. Michael, though still bristling with resentment, had taken the product manager role I'd assigned him. He walked into the office every morning with the air of a prince forced to live among peasants, but he showed up nonetheless. His team reported a mix of frustration and flashes of brilliance. He had ideas, big ones, sometimes even good ones, but he lacked patience. He wanted everything done yesterday with little regard for process or people. More than once, I heard whispers that he'd clashed with senior engineers, dismissing their concerns with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. I told myself it was a phase. Time and responsibility might soften him. That was the hope I clung to, even as doubts nibbled at the edges of my thoughts. And then the letter came. It was a gray morning in January when my assistant brought it in, her hands trembling as she set the thick sealed envelope on my desk. "It's from the IRS," she whispered, as though the walls themselves might be listening. I frowned. IRS correspondence was rarely so heavy. I slid my letter opener through the seal and unfolded the contents, my eyes scanning line after line of legal jargon, until the words burned into me like fire. Allegations of tax fraud, underreporting of income, possible criminal liability. The room spun. My throat went dry. 30 years of pouring my life into this company, of building it with clean hands and sleepless nights, and now they were accusing me of theft. "Is this real?" my assistant stammered. I couldn't answer. My hands shook as I pressed the letter flat, rereading it again and again, searching for some mistake, some explanation. But there it was, black and white. An official notice, my name listed, my company under investigation. A sickness crept through me, not just fear, but betrayal. This wasn't random. It couldn't be. And immediately, my mind went to the board. For years, they had tolerated my leadership, but only barely. A few of the younger members, hungry, ambitious, had whispered about fresh perspectives and modern leadership in ways that made my skin crawl. They'd never dared move openly against me. Until now, a hostile takeover. It had to be. Manufacture a scandal, smear my reputation, force me to step down in disgrace, and then swoop in to divide the spoils of the empire I had built. The thought made bile rise in my throat. Not while I still had breath. The following week was a blur of meetings with lawyers and sleepless nights, hunched over old financial statements, hunting for the flaw they'd exploit. My legal team assured me the charges could be fought, but the risk was real. If they proved deliberate fraud, I wouldn't just lose the company, I could lose my freedom. Still, I couldn't let the board see me falter. I stood tall in every meeting, my voice steady, my gaze unshaken. But inside, a storm raged. What cut deepest was not the fear of prison, but the violation itself. My company was my life's work, my identity. To see it reduced to a battlefield for ambition, it was unbearable. Michael, meanwhile, floated through the halls like nothing had happened. He showed up to product meetings, sulked when things didn't go his way, and bragged when one of his ideas landed well with his team. He barely mentioned the investigation except once, at dinner. We sat in silence across from one another, the clink of silverware the only sound between us. Finally, he said, "So, the IRS thing, pretty serious, huh?" I swallowed hard, setting down my fork. "It's under control." He nodded slowly, then smirked. "Maybe this is a sign, you know? A time for transition." "What do you mean?" "Well," he said casually, "the board might think you're compromised. They might be looking for someone younger, someone untarnished, to step in, someone like me." The words stabbed deeper than he could know. Not because I believed he had a hand in this, no, not Michael, not my own son, but because his ambition was so transparent, so unrelenting, even now when my world was crumbling. I forced my voice calm. "This company is not a toy you can snatch up because the moment feels convenient. It's not a crown you inherit just because your last name is Ward. If you want leadership, prove you deserve it." His smirk faded into a scowl. "You'll never let me in, will you? You'll always see me as some spoiled kid." I said nothing. Silence was safer than truth. That night, after he'd gone, I stood at the window of my office, the city glittering below. The notice sat on my desk, heavy as a stone, a reminder of the noose tightening around me. But I would not bow, not to the board, not to the vultures circling for scraps. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't allow myself to even imagine, was that the knife wasn't in the board's hand at all. It was already lodged in my back, and the hand that drove it there was my son's. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. The investigation didn't fizzle out the way I prayed it might. It grew, feeding on itself, snowballing into something monstrous. The IRS was relentless, requesting files, issuing subpoenas, digging into every corner of my company's financial history. They weren't satisfied with explanations. They wanted blood. And worse, the press caught wind of it. Headlines splashed across business journals. Software queen accused of fraud. My name, my reputation, was dragged through the mud I had spent 3 decades keeping clear. The board, of course, was terrified. Some members rallied to me, voices tight with loyalty but eyes clouded with doubt. Others pushed hard for stability, which was nothing more than code for my removal. It wasn't a full ouster, at least, not yet. But under immense pressure, I was asked to step down temporarily while the investigation ran its course. Temporary. The word tasted like ash. I fought it. I reminded them I had built this empire brick by brick, that every contract, every deal, every line of code was stamped with my sweat. But fear is stronger than gratitude. In the end, they handed me a single sheet of paper, already drafted, asking for my signature. I signed it with a hand that barely felt like my own. The next day, the board announced the interim CEO, Michael, my son. He strode into the press conference in a navy suit that still smelled of fresh tailoring, his chin high, his grin practiced. Cameras flashed as he declared his commitment to transparency and new leadership. I watched from the back of the room, my heart splitting down the middle. Part of me was proud he looked the part, carried himself with confidence, said all the right words. This was the son I had dreamed of stepping into the light. But the larger part of me felt hollowed out. I had spent my entire adult life building this company, fighting for every inch, and now, in the space of a few weeks, I was on the outside looking in. Disgraced. Powerless. My own son sitting where I once sat. At first, Michael pretended to be humble about it. "It's just until you're cleared, Mom," he said one evening, breezing into my home like nothing had changed. "Don't worry, I'll take care of things. Keep the seat warm for you." But it didn't take long for the mask to slip. Within weeks, he was acting like a conqueror who had won the throne in battle. He reshuffled teams, replaced loyal veterans with his college friends, and threw money at flashy projects that looked good on paper but made no sense in execution. The employees whispered. Some pitied me, others feared for their jobs. But no one dared speak out loud. I stayed away from the office, forced into exile. Every time I walked past the glass tower that bore my company's name, I felt like a ghost haunting my own creation. And Michael? He thrived in the spotlight. Magazine covers, interviews, glowing features about the bold young visionary, leading a software empire into a new age. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd buried me. But in the quiet of my empty house, I began to gather strength. I pored over the case files, digging into every accusation, every discrepancy. I kept meticulous notes, searching for the hole in their argument, the shadow of the hand guiding it all. I still believed it was the board, pulling strings behind the curtain. It never even crossed my mind that Michael, my Michael, was capable of such betrayal. I told myself he was reckless, entitled, foolish, but not cruel, not treacherous. Not him. The truth, when it finally came, would cut deeper than any wound the board or the IRS could deliver. For now, though, I watched my son strut in a crown he hadn't earned, smiling as if he'd slain a dragon. He thought the battle was over. He didn't realize the war had only just begun. I remember the night I hit rock bottom. The house was silent, too silent. My days had become a cycle of sleepless nights and restless mornings, always with a glass of cold coffee half forgotten on the counter. My company was slipping away. My reputation smeared, my son parading around in the very role I had denied him. The loneliness was suffocating, and the worst part was the doubt that crept into me. What if they're right? What if I failed? What if I'd been blind all along? That's when I reached for the phone and dialed the only person who had ever been able to cut through my storms. Harriet. She had been my CFO for nearly 2 decades, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and a tongue sharp enough to slice through any nonsense. Harriet had retired a few years earlier to tend her garden and her grandchildren, but she was still the person I trusted most in matters of money, power, and truth. When she picked up, her voice was the same as it had always been, steady, no nonsense with that hint of warmth she tried to hide. "You sound like hell." I laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "That's because I am hell. "They're going to bury me, Harriet." She didn't ask me what I meant. She already knew. She always did. "Pour a glass of wine," she said. "I'm coming over." That night, we sat at my kitchen table with stacks of files spread between us. Old audits, recent statements, the official notices from the IRS, all of it, laid out like the pieces of a terrible puzzle. Harriet's reading glasses perched on her nose, her pen tapping against the paper with an impatience I remembered well. "This doesn't smell right," she muttered. "These aren't mistakes, Ellie. This is sabotage." I stared at her. "From the board, I told you." She gave me a long look over her glasses. "Maybe. But let's not jump. Let's follow the money." So we did. Night after night, Harriet came back, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with just her sharp eyes and sharper instincts. We cross-referenced expense reports, traced transactions, pulled copies of archived filings no one thought to look at. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The numbers had been manipulated, not by omission or oversight, but with deliberate, careful precision. Revenue shifted, deductions inflated, timing altered just enough to raise red flags. Whoever had done this knew the system well enough to make it look accidental, but not well enough to cover every trail. Harriet's pen tapped faster. "This isn't the board. It's internal. Someone with access, someone who knew where to push." I felt my stomach drop. But who? She pushed another file toward me, her finger jabbing at a line item buried deep in a quarterly report. "Here. This account, your signature's on it. But the authorization code isn't yours. Someone forged it." The air went cold around me. My hands trembled as I took the paper, staring at the numbers, the letters, the small detail I had missed in my panic. "Who had this code?" I whispered. Harriet's eyes softened. She didn't want to say it. I didn't want to hear it. But there it was, between us. "Michael." The room seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat. "My son. My only son." He wouldn't," I said. But even as the words left my lips, I knew they were lies. I saw the ambition in his eyes, the entitlement, the way he had looked at me across the dinner table and hinted that the scandal could be my downfall and his opportunity. It hadn't been the board. It had been him all along. The knife I thought the board had sharpened was the knife my own son had slid between my ribs. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the sob that threatened to tear me apart. The betrayal was too big, too raw. I had given him everything, my time, my money, my company, my love. And he had repaid me with treachery. Harriet reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't you dare break, Eleanor. Not now. That boy may have drawn first blood. But this war isn't finished." I looked at her through tear-blurred eyes, her steady grip anchoring me to the ground. "You built this empire," she said. "Now it's time to take it back." And in that moment, something shifted in me. The grief was still there, but beneath it, a fire sparked to life. I had been knocked down, humiliated, betrayed by the person I trusted most. But I was still Eleanor Rhodes. I was still the woman who had clawed her way up from nothing to build a kingdom out of code. Michael thought he had won. But now, with Harriet at my side, I would begin the slow, deliberate work of undoing him. The darkness had swallowed me whole. But it was in the darkness that I found my resolve. Once I saw the truth, I couldn't unsee it. Michael's fingerprints were everywhere. Harriet and I kept pulling threads, and each one unraveled more of his carefully spun web. Bank transfers routed through shell accounts. Expenses shifted just enough to trip IRS alarms. And then Harriet's eyes gleamed as she uncovered it. Michael's own carelessness. He had used his company email, of all things, to brag to a college friend about his genius plan. Harriet slid the printed copy across my kitchen table one evening, her lips pursed in grim satisfaction. I stared at the words. "By the time she's gone, I'll be running the whole damn thing. Everyone will finally see who the real Rhodes is." My hands shook. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rip the paper into 1,000 pieces. But mostly, I just wanted to stop breathing. That was my son, my boy who used to sit on the floor of my office, building castles out of spare floppy disks. My boy who had cried when his father died, clinging to me like I was the only anchor left in the world. And now, here he was, plotting my downfall with the arrogance of a usurper. I pressed the paper to my chest, as though I could smother it, erase it, undo it. But truth doesn't vanish when you close your eyes. It only waits. Harriet was merciless. We've got him. Everything we need. The forged codes, the transfers, the emails. This isn't just fraud, Eleanor. This is premeditated. Her words cut like knives, but I needed them. I needed her steel because mine was faltering. Harriet, I whispered, he's my son. She leaned forward, her gaze locking with mine. And you're his mother. You gave him life. You gave him this company. You gave him everything. And what did he do? He tried to bury you alive. I shook my head, tears blurring my vision. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he thought, "Don't you dare excuse him," Harriet snapped. He knew, Eleanor. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Her words echoed in the hollow of my chest. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew she was right. Still, the weight of it crushed me. The law was on my side now. Justice was within reach. But justice meant destroying my son. How could I live with that? How could I live without it? The nights were the hardest. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind torn in two. On one side, the voice of a mother, protect him. He's blood. He can change. On the other, the voice of a CEO, defend what you built. He's already taken too much. I thought of his father, of the promise I had made at the graveside, whispering that I'd take care of Michael, no matter what. Had I failed that promise? Or was protecting the company also protecting Michael in a twisted way, forcing him to face the man he had become? I didn't have answers. Only questions that burned like acid. One evening, Harriet found me at the kitchen table, staring at a photo of Michael as a boy 6 years old, wearing a crooked paper crown from his birthday party. "You can't keep splitting yourself in half like this," she said softly. I blinked back tears. "He's my baby, Harriet. My baby." Her voice softened, but it stayed firm. "And you're mine, Ellie. You're my friend, my sister in arms, and right now you're the one who needs saving. If you don't fight back, he wins. The company dies, everything you worked for dies, and Michael learns nothing." I swallowed hard, tracing the edges of the photograph. She was right. As much as it shattered me, she was right, so we pressed on. Harriet gathered digital trails, flagged every inconsistency, compiled folders that could stand up in court. I helped, though each discovery felt like another nail driven into my heart. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. To know that I had raised the very hand that struck me down. But with every file we stacked, every thread we tied together, I felt a strange strength returning. Grief and rage were forging into something new, resolve. Michael thought his brilliance had put me in the grave. He had no idea his own arrogance had lit the torch I would use to burn his lies to the ground. I didn't want this war. God help me, I would have given anything for peace. But he had chosen it, and I would finish it. Once the decision settled in my bones, something in me shifted. The grief remained, yes, but it no longer ruled me. I had cried my tears. Now it was time to sharpen them into blades. Harriet became my general. She drew up the battle map, meticulous as always, her pen tapping rhythms of war across my dining room table. "We don't go in guns blazing," she said, eyes glittering. "We go in quiet, surgical. We let him dig his own grave, then hand him the shovel." I nodded. My hands still trembled when I thought of Michael, but Harriet's voice anchored me. I had built an empire once. I could fight for it now. Our first move was the board. Michael had basked in their admiration since the day he strutted into the CEO's chair. They loved his youth, his energy, the glossy headlines he attracted. But loyalty is a fickle thing in the world of business. It bends with the wind. So Harriet and I gave the wind a shove. Anonymously at first, documents began appearing in board members' inboxes, proof of inconsistencies, falsified authorizations, unexplained transfers. Nothing explosive yet, just enough to plant seeds of doubt, enough to make them wonder if their golden prince had feet of clay. And seeds of doubt grow quickly in corporate soil. I heard it in the way their calls to me began to change. No longer sharp with suspicion, but cautious, curious. They wanted to know what else I might have. They wanted to know if they had backed the wrong horse. Harriet smiled like a cat who had just cornered a mouse. They'll turn on him. Just wait. Next came the regulators. We filed a countersuit, presenting evidence of forged authorizations and manipulated accounts. It was dangerous, like lighting a fire in a dry forest. But it was the only way to seize control of the narrative. Once again, the press picked it up. This time, though, the story wasn't disgraced founder. It was founder fights back. The tide was beginning to shift. And Michael. At first, he brushed it off, all swagger and bravado. They're just jealous, he told a reporter, his grin too wide. They can't stand that someone young and innovative is shaking things up, but cracks began to show. His emails to the board grew sharper, more defensive. His once confident presentation stumbled as questions turned hostile. The young man who had strutted into the spotlight like a king was beginning to sweat under the heat. Harriet and I watched it all unfold from the shadows. "See?" she murmured one night, sliding a glass of wine into my hand. "He's unraveling. Pride makes men sloppy." I wanted to feel triumph. Instead, all I felt was a hollow ache. This was my son breaking before my eyes, but I couldn't stop now, not when the company's survival hung in the balance. The board meeting where it finally shifted was one I will never forget. Michael was presenting a flashy new initiative, a multi-million-dollar gamble on a half-baked idea. The kind of move that makes headlines but sinks ships. And then one of the longest-serving board members, a man who had praised him, endlessly interrupted. "Michael," he said slowly, "can you explain these discrepancies in last quarter's filings?" The room went still. Michael stammered, waved it off, claimed it was accounting noise. But the board member didn't look convinced. Neither did the others. I wasn't in the room, but word traveled fast. That night, Harriet called me with a gleam in her voice. "The tide's turning, Eleanor. They're starting to smell the rot." For the first time in months, I allowed myself a long, steady breath. This was the beginning. The first real move to reclaiming what was mine. The boy who thought he had stolen the crown was beginning to feel its weight. And I was waiting in the wings, ready to take it back. The collapse came faster than even Harriet predicted. It began with one article and exposés from a mid-tier financial journalist who had gotten their hands on fragments of the documents we had quietly released. The headline was sharp as a knife. "New CEO Michael Wren, visionary or villain?" Within days, bigger outlets picked it up. The story snowballed, gathering momentum with each retelling. Discrepancies in filings, questionable transfers, falsified authorizations. Words that had once been whispered in boardrooms were now shouted on front pages. Michael's golden boy image shattered overnight. I watched the evening news in silence. Harriet beside me, as they played clips of Michael dodging reporters outside his penthouse. His face was tight, jaw clenched, the easy arrogance gone. "They're lies," he snapped at the cameras. "All of it. Smear campaigns. You'll see." But the world wasn't buying it. Not anymore. The board moved swiftly. Fear always makes men efficient. An emergency meeting was called, this time with me present. I walked into that room like I had 30 years ago, back when it was just me and a handful of dreamers building something from nothing. The difference was now, I carried scars and steel in equal measure. The chairman cleared his throat. "Michael, the evidence presented against you is, well, damning." Michael tried to bluster, to talk over them, but the tide had turned. The same board members who had cheered his appointment now shifted in their seats, unwilling to meet his eyes. And then the vote was called. It wasn't even close. Michael Wren was removed as CEO, effective immediately. And in his place, by unanimous decision, they reinstated me. The applause that followed was polite, professional, but to me it sounded like thunder. Not because of ego, but because I had clawed my way back from the abyss. I had my company again. My life's work. The lawsuits piled up quickly after that. Regulators opened investigations. Shareholders demanded accountability. Creditors circled. Michael was named personally liable in several suits. His accounts, bloated by arrogance and carelessness, began to bleed dry under legal fees. His friends, the ones who had orbited him when he wore the crown, vanished like mist at dawn. Parties dried up. Invitations stopped coming. He was no longer the glittering young CEO. He was a liability. By the end of that year, the mighty heir was a pariah. The last time I saw him in those days was in a photograph. A grainy tabloid shot, Michael, hair unkempt, wearing the uniform of a fast food restaurant, hunched behind the counter. A headline mocked him mercilessly. I held the paper in my hands for a long time. My son, the boy I had cradled, the boy I had dreamed, would one day build with me, reduced to this. Harriet looked at me cautiously. This is what he earned, Eleanor. Nothing more, nothing less. I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. Justice had been served. But justice is not always sweet. At the company, I was welcomed back with open arms. Employees who had once looked at me with suspicion now greeted me with relief, respect, even gratitude. "Welcome home, Miss Wren," one of them said softly as I passed through the lobby. Home, yes, it felt that way. The business was bruised, but alive, and I would see it healed. Michael, meanwhile, spiraled further. The boy who had once mocked me for being old-fashioned now flipped burgers to pay his rent. I wondered if humility might finally be sinking its claws into him, or if he was still clinging to resentment, still blaming me for the ruin he had brought on himself. Time would tell. But for now, I stood where I belonged. At the helm of the company I had built, stronger in spirit than ever before. The prince had fallen, and the queen had returned to her throne. Victory should have tasted sweet, and in some ways it did. I would not deny the satisfaction of walking into my office again, the one I had designed myself decades ago, and seeing the staff straighten their backs, smiles tugging at their lips. I had saved my company. I had saved myself. But when the day's work was done and the city outside my window turned to glittering night, a hollow space grew inside me. Because no matter how justified the outcome, Michael was still my son, flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. And blood carries weight. It took me a week to gather the courage, but eventually I went to see him. The fast food place was tucked on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place people rushed through without a second thought. Grease clung to the air, mingling with the sharp tang of fryer oil. The neon sign buzzed faintly, half the letters flickering. Through the glass, I saw him. Michael. My boy, who once wore tailored suits and strutted through marble lobbies, now stood slouched in a polyester uniform, headset crooked on his ear, hair damp with sweat. He was wiping down a counter, face pinched in a scowl of concentration, or perhaps resentment. For a moment, my breath caught. My heart, traitorous thing, whispered of the toddler who once tugged at my skirts, begging for just one more story. But the man before me had nearly destroyed me. I pushed open the door. The bell chimed overhead. Michael looked up, and for the first time in months our eyes met. His face drained of color. "Mom," he muttered. "Not Eleanor, not Ms. Wren. Just Mom." I stepped closer, the linoleum floor sticky under my shoes. "Hello, Michael." He swallowed hard, glancing around as if afraid someone would hear. His coworkers bustled behind him, teenagers with acne and tired eyes, oblivious to the storm brewing at the counter. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, low and sharp. "I came to see my son." His jaw tightened. "Come to gloat." The words pierced me, but I kept my voice steady. "No. I came because despite everything, you are still my child, and I needed to see you with my own eyes." He laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a bark. "Well, here I am. Humiliated, stripped of everything. Congratulations." "Michael," I said softly, "you did this to yourself." His eyes flared, anger snapping like dry wood in a fire. "I only wanted what was mine. You built that company for me, for us." I shook my head. "I built it for the world, for the people who believed in me, who trusted me, who worked alongside me. You wanted to reap a harvest without ever planting a seed." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Only silence stretched between us. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Do you know what hurt the most? Not the fraud, not the board turning their backs. It was knowing you were the knife in my back, my own son." For a moment, Michael looked like a boy again. His lips trembled, and something flickered across his face, regret, maybe, or shame. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I thought I was smarter than you," he muttered. "I thought I could win." "And did you?" I asked. He glanced down at his stained uniform, his shoes sticking to the greasy floor. His silence was answer enough. I straightened. My heart ached, but my resolve held. Michael, I will not carry your burden anymore. I will not shield you from consequences or fix the messes you've made. That time is gone. If you want redemption, you must earn it yourself. His eyes darted to mine, desperate, searching. So that's it? You're cutting me off? I am setting you free. I corrected gently. To stand on your own, to learn what work and humility mean. Someday, if you prove you're more than greed, perhaps there will be a place for you again. But until then, I let the words hang, heavy as stone. He turned away, wiping the counter with shaky hands. You don't understand, he whispered. I blinked back tears. I understand more than you think. And with that, I left him there behind the greasy counter, the smell of fryer oil clinging to my clothes as I stepped back into the night. The weight of blood is heavy. But sometimes to save yourself, you must learn to carry it without letting it crush you. And I had more work to do. In the months that followed, I poured myself back into the company with a vigor that startled even me. H be damned, I was alive again. Harriet, though technically retired, became my most trusted advisor once more. She declined every offer of salary or title, insisting she had no need for either. I just want to see the house we built stand tall again, she told me, eyes twinkling. Loyal allies like her reminded me what true wealth looked like. We repaired the damage Michael had caused. We rebuilt relationships with clients, soothed jittery investors, and tightened internal controls so no one could ever weaponize the company against me again. Slowly, the company's reputation began to gleam once more, not because of flashy headlines, but because of quiet, consistent excellence, the very thing I had built it on 30 years ago. The board, once fractured, now stood united behind me. Some even apologized for their earlier betrayal, though I neither demanded nor required it. I had no time for grudges. The only thing that mattered was the future. And the future was bright. At night, when the office finally grew quiet, I would sometimes think of Michael, of the boy who once sat on my lap as I sketched business plans, listening with wide eyes as if I were telling fairy tales, of the man who had turned that dream into a weapon, and of the fallen prince now hidden away behind counters and fryers, tasting bitterness in every shift. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. Hatred corrodes the vessel that holds it, but I no longer carried him either, not as an obligation, not as an anchor. He would have to carry himself. One evening, I wrote him a letter. I never knew if he read it, but I wrote it all the same. Michael, I will not close the door forever. You are my son, and that will never change. But neither will the truth. You betrayed me, and you betrayed the company. That stain is yours to wash away, not mine to scrub for you. One day, if you prove you are more than greed, if you prove you know the value of honest work and the weight of loyalty, there may be a place for you again. But until then, you will learn what real work means. Your mother, Eleanor. I folded the paper, sealed it, and left it at his small apartment. After that, I let the wind carry the matter where it would. Years of sacrifice had taught me many lessons, but the greatest was this. True dignity lies in living by your own terms, not by the terms of others. For so long, I had lived for my son, for the board, for the world. But at 61, I chose to live for myself. And in that choice, I found peace. The company thrived again, stronger, sharper, and more resilient than ever before. My people, our people, stood with me, not out of fear or blind loyalty, but because they believed. That was the legacy I had always dreamed of leaving behind. And as for Michael, well, perhaps one day. But until that day came, the Queen's terms remained clear. I had reclaimed my crown, my power, and my future on my terms and no one else's. And I was finally, gloriously free.